Another popular way to configure DHCP is by using PowerShell. Now, if you don't currently use PowerShell, there is a bit of a learning curve just to familiarize yourself with the syntax. A great tool for figuring out PowerShell. I'm going to go to Server Manager. In Server Manager, I'm going to click on Tools. You'll see DHCP is in the list because I've already installed the DHCP feature. But if I scroll down the list, I have Windows PowerShell. And I'm also going to click Tools again, scroll down the list, and I'm going to click Windows PowerShell ISE, which is the integrated scripting engine. So we're going to open both of those. Now I'm going to pull up the Windows PowerShell prompt itself first. If I'm in just the Windows PowerShell prompt, now if I want to verify DHCP is installed on a specific server, I could run this get Windows feature. Now let's say you don't know exactly what the name of the DHCP would be in PowerShell. I'm just going to type star DHCP star and hit enter. Well, you can see on this server, it does tell me that the DHCP server role is installed and the remote server administration tools, which are just the graphical tools for DHCP. It also tells me those tools are installed. Now, from here, you would actually have to know the DHCP commands. For example, if I wanted to add a scope for IP version 4, if you're just in the DHCP console itself, I could type add-DHCP. Now, I'm going to hit tab. DHCP does have tab completion built in. So when I hit tab, the first is add-DHCP server in DC for domain controller, DHCP server security group. I'll keep clicking tab, and eventually, if I keep tabbing through, I get over to add-DHCP server v4 scope. Now that sounds like the right thing, an IP version 4 scope. Assuming we figure that part out, I still don't know what the actual switches are that I need to use. In PowerShell, an interesting feature, I can just space and type dash. Every switch in PowerShell will start with a dash. Well, I can actually hit tab. So dash, tab. When I do that, it's going to start to cycle through every possible switch you could have used. So the start range for my address, the end range, the name of the scope I want to create, a description of the scope. So there are many things I could have actually typed in. A tool that I find much more useful if you're trying to do something in PowerShell that you're not that familiar with, or if you are just not that familiar with PowerShell at any level. The integrated scripting engine, or PowerShell ISE, or ICE many people call it. The big difference between this and the PowerShell tool itself is the commands pane that shows up here. This gives me every PowerShell module loaded on my server. For many PowerShell modules, when you install a role on your server, an example would be Active Directory. Because this machine is a domain controller, I have an Active Directory module that will let me run all Active Directory commands directly from here. If I were not a domain controller, the Active Directory module would not be in the list. I'm also a DNS server, so DNS is in the list. So this commands list actually grows with the operating system when you install roles and features. Now, I'm a DHCP server, so DHCP server is in the list. If I uninstall DHCP, or if you go to a server that DHCP has never been installed on, you're not going to find that module in the commands list. I'm going to choose DHCP server. This gives me all the commandlets for DHCP. So anything you want to run in DHCP, it's in the list. Just find the one you want to choose. Now, I said I want to add a scope for IP version 4. Well, that is add-DHCP server v4 scope. Well, I'm going to choose that option. When I select show details, this is very cool. it gives me a form I can fill out. We'll see as soon as that loads. So here, I can say, I want to name this scope Washington. The start range is 192.168.1.51. So that's the first IP address I want to lease. The end range, 192.168.1.254, is the last address I want to lease. So every address ending in 51 up through 254 will be leased from this DHCP server. I need to define a subnet mask. I'm just going to choose 255.255.255.0, so just a default Class C subnet mask. I'm also going to say the lease duration. I'll just make it 8 days, which is the default if you were to create a scope in the interface. So lease duration, we'll just make that 8. Anything with an asterisk beside it is mandatory. So the end range, name, start range, subnet mask. Everything else is optional here because it does not have that asterisk beside it. So many of these just won't be defined, or they will go to default values. So at a minimum, only the first 4 do I need. What makes this such a great learning tool, if I click Insert at the bottom, it actually builds that entire line of PowerShell syntax for me. So add -DHCP server v4 scope, -in range, the address we typed in, -name, Washington is what I defined here for the name of the scope, -start range, the address we defined, and we also defined the subnet mask, and I defined the lease duration. Well, I can simply hit enter, and it drops to the next line. If I open my DHCP console, I'm going to expand IP version 4, and notice that Washington scope is in the list. If I expand on my address pool, you can see the start address and end address we defined, so it completely created that scope on my DHCP server based on that PowerShell syntax. Now, if I go back to the PowerShell ISE, I also have a few other options here. One is to copy. I could have simply clicked copy, and it would have copied all this to the clipboard. Well then, if I were to go open Notepad, or any text editor for that matter, in the text editor, I'd just hit Control-V and it pastes that entire line. Now I'm just going to click File, Save As, and I'm going to name this DHCP scope.ps1, and I'm going to wrap the entire thing in quotes. Now, I had my caps lock on, so it's in capital letters, but it is not case sensitive. But when I wrap this in quotes and have an extension of .ps1, it saves this as a PowerShell script. I'm going to save it to my desktop so I don't have to go dig around for it later on. But I'm going to click Save. Now when I look at my desktop and my server here, minimize a few of these windows we don't need, I now have a DHCP scope that's in a PowerShell format. So you could create this in a test environment, verify it works, then move it over to your actual production environment to reduce or completely eliminate human error. But very useful this ISE tool is to help us create scopes and everything else in DHCP for that matter. So in many of the lessons, we will be in this PowerShell ISE because this helps us with everything from DHCP, DNS, Active Directory, group policy. Almost every component of the operating system you can think of has a management capability through PowerShell. So this is a great learning tool and a great way to reduce a lot of common mistakes.